We've heard, we've started sort of at the institutional level. We've engaged with some frameworks for considering religion and spirituality in the visual art, and now we're thinking about specifically exhibitions and installations in those museums and how they might shape our experiences for visitors. So the panel is Exhibition and Installations, Shaping the Museum Experience for Visitors. I'll introduce our three speakers now. Peter L. Doebler is the Kettering Curator of Asian Art at the Dayton Art Institute in Dayton, Ohio. Maddie Blomquist is the Roy and Carol Christensen Curator of Religious Art at Brigham Young University Museum of Art. And Sean P. Burris is the Curator of Judaic Art at the North Carolina Museum of Art in Raleigh, North Carolina, where he stewards a collection of historic and contemporary Judaic art in conversation with the museum's global collection and directs the NCMA's Initiative for Jewish Art and Culture. Please join me in welcoming our first speaker, Peter.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be with you all today. It's been exciting so far, and I look forward to what else we have in store today. So to start with a question, have you ever had a memorable experience standing before an artwork in a museum? Talking to this crowd, I feel like all of you probably will answer yes. So we'll move on. What I'm thinking of is, where there's something magnetic, mesmerizing that pulls you into the artwork, into its world, and almost paradoxically, the more you look at it in its specificity, the more it seems to open up to something bigger, giving you kind of insight into the big picture, as it were. Such experiences for myself prompted my studies looking at the nexus of art, religion, and aesthetics. And it drives my work as a museum curator, considering how these are inextricably linked throughout human history, and that rather than being peripheral, they are essential to how we understand different cultural paradigms, as well as considering what it means to be human and how humans can flourish, things that have been already referenced earlier today. I had one such experience when I first encountered the artwork of David Moss. Moss is an American-Israeli artist living and practicing in Jerusalem since the 1980s. He was raised in Dayton, Ohio, so a local connection for us, and his sister still lives there. So a couple of years ago, he was in town. She invited me over to the house to meet him and see some of his work. And as he pulled out item after item, I was just kind of drawn in, amazed by the world that each individual work opened up. And I thought to myself, there needs to be an exhibition of this guy's work, because he describes himself as a folk artist, but of a very sophisticated folk. And he's always kind of created art, but not for the art market, not for galleries, not for museums, rather for his community. Schedules finally cooperated, and for the past year, I've been working on planning for the exhibition that we're going to have in fall of 2027. Featuring approximately 200 artworks, this will be the first comprehensive exhibition of Moss's work across his career. Moss describes himself as a mitzvah beautifier, continuously exploring artistic forms that can give visual expression to the rich intellectual, ritual, and spiritual traditions of Jewish culture. He combines intensive research with his own spiritual practice, along with artistic skills that are largely self-taught. He creates dynamic works that reinvigorate traditional forms. My comments today will draw on background work for the exhibition, and after a brief introduction to his work, I'll use it as a lens to briefly explore this symposium's question of spiritual engagement with art objects from two related angles. First, how does Moss's work serve as a catalyst for cultivating spiritual contemplation and theological ideas, particularly through its interplay of word and image? Second, how should a secular museum serving a diverse public present such art in a way that it allows guests to fully grasp all of its rich intended layers of meaning, making the gallery a site for measured spiritual education? Over a career of more than 50 years, Moss has progressively branched out in ever more diverse directions. This slide and the previous can just give you a sampling of some of the variety of his work. He works in ink calligraphy, paintings, prints of various types, cut paper, art books, sculpture, ceramics, collage, architectural design, and conceptual works, just to name a few. His intricate hand-drawn ketubah, or traditional illustrated marriage documents, is something that he is credited with reviving since the 1970s. His handwritten, elaborately illuminated Passover Haggadah, completed in 1987 as a private collection, was recently received into the National Library of Israel's collection. According to Moss, he works in a method that combines head, heart, and hand. Head, for him, is staying close to authentic, traditional Jewish sources that inspire his work, texts, ideas that he mines for insight. Heart is his own creativity that he brings to these traditions, innovating them in new and creative ways. And hand is his dedication to fine craft work, whether through detailed calligraphy, laying on of gold leaf, paper cuts, and various other techniques. For Moss, the artistic and spiritual are intertwined, each supporting the other, both for him as an artist in his creative process and for the audience when they receive his work. When Moss shares his work with others, he's noticed a recurring response. I'll quote at length. He says, "I would notice on the faces of the viewers a rapt attention, a deep engagement I had rarely experienced elsewhere. It became very clear to me that there was some kind of powerful educational magic that was created in the intimate experience of sharing meaningful, thoughtful Jewish visual images together with the verbal interpretations, explanations, and expounding that accompanied them. Somehow this simultaneous fusion of sparkling delights for the eye, ringing words for the ear, and thoughtful ideas for the mind created an entryway through which the content could pour unimpeded." This abbreviated overview of Moss's work, along with his comment here, suggests that by exploring his work, we may gain some insight into how art can serve as a catalyst for cultivating spiritual contemplation and theological ideas. Let's take a look at how this works in one specific example, really picked at random. And a little bit of an anomaly, as it's very abstract and much of his work is more textual based. What do you notice when you first look at this artwork? Perhaps the abstract geometric composition recalls other works, such as those by Josef Albers or Ad Reinhardt. However, if we dig deeper, we may find that there is more than meets the eye. This is a work called Counting Omer. It's from 2014, and it's part of a subscription series that Moss has been doing for about 15 years. He'll create about 3 or 4 works, usually prints, and he'll send them to his subscribers. No questions asked, they have to take what he sends them. And he found it's been a perfect outlet for all of his kind of creative projects he's never had time for. He keeps all of his ideas in pizza boxes, and when he tries to get to something new, he takes one out, and this is just a quick way to do something. It's based on a larger collage you can see on the right there. The work is based on a text, a command that comes from Leviticus 23, to count the 49 days between the second day of Passover and Shavuot, when the Torah was given to the Jewish people at Sinai. The observance is a unified event that consists of 49 components, reciting a blessing each day, and it's imperative that you not miss a day. You need to be able to count consecutively. So over the centuries, different types of Omer counters were developed to help people keep track and remember. Then each day, the recitation will include a couple of components: saying a blessing, saying the number of the day, saying the number of completed weeks, and then saying the number of additional days completed in the current week. The challenge Moss set for himself was to create an Omer counter that uses no words and no numbers, purely abstract. If we try to interpret the image, each individual box corresponds to one of the 49 days. Zooming in, the gray boxes at the top represent the tens. So this would be the number 30. The gray at the bottom represent the single digits. A rectangle with a rounded corner is a 0, so this is the number 30. Then in the center, the vertical columns represent the weeks, and the horizontal columns, the days. So if we were getting up, and then you look at this, you would be able to say, today is 30 days, which are 4 weeks and 2 days of the Omer. The different colors that you see on the print, here the pink and the red, those add an additional layer of meaning, as they're drawn from Kabbalistic custom, where each of the 7 weeks of counting are identified with 7 divine attributes, such as strength or splendor. And in turn, each day of the week is identified with a sub-attribute contained within the larger one. So Moss associates a color with each one, and in this example, red is strength, dark pink is splendor, so this would represent splendor within strength. So each day, when you make the recitation, you would meditate more specifically on the particular attribute of that day. A key part of Moss's process is that he always includes some sort of verbal component. The explanation of counting Omer that I've just given to you is largely drawn from a 4-page insert that accompanies the print. Indeed, it should be seen as a component of the artwork rather than as just some additional supplement thrown in there. It invites the viewer into a dialogue with the artist and the artwork, creating a dynamic process of discovery. For Moss, the verbal reflection and commentary, a sort of ekphrasis, plays an essential role of engaging with the visual product to the point that he comments, quote, "The synthesis of the verbal and the visual has become a cornerstone of my creative process." In this way, Moss seems to go beyond visual exegesis in its simplest form. If you think of a painting, of a Bible story that through its formal arrangement and the artistic choices provides an interpretation of the text. Rather, he deepens it by adding this additional verbal layer of commentary that compounds the effect of the visual he creates. However, this verbal supplement should not be seen as merely an interpretive straitjacket, that this is the only way Moss wants you to see the artwork. Rather, I think it's better to think of this kind of combination of word and image as a performance art that Moss is enacting. It's intended to lead the viewer into contemplation. He employs the visual and the verbal in an attempt to create an immersive encounter where the parts make up a larger whole. This kind of performance art, if we think of it like that, the dynamic interplay of word and image, makes Moss's work a compelling example of how art can function as a catalyst for cultivating spiritual contemplation. However, this also raises questions of how such work can be presented in a museum context. Again, a sample of variety here. My attempt to concisely summarize for you this one print, Counting Omer, look at how long it's taken. If you've been able to follow along, great. But then if you think of that, the current checklist for this exhibition is around 200 works, each with significant verbal commentary. So if that would, in effect, create 200 performances, that would require several minutes of engagement from the viewer in order to ideally create this magic moment of encounter. When museums know that guests spend less than minutes in front of artworks, let alone reading some sort of didactic with it, how do you make something like this engaging and accessible? Again, I'm not going to give you questions, but I'm not going to give you answers either. Rather, this is something I'm wrestling with now. It really is speaking to the role of programming and support materials, of course, really thinking of maybe a multi-pronged approach so that you create scaffolding layers of exploration. You could have the most basic of gallery labels to just give the gist for people that want to go through quickly, developing apps that would allow people to listen to artist commentary. The artist is very involved in the project, so we have that advantage. Or you could have more extensive catalogs and other texts that people could dig in on their own. artists in residencies, trying to build out many points of contact. Time does not permit a full exploration of all of our options, but instead, hopefully I've highlighted one more way that art objects may invite spiritual engagement and present unique avenues for insight, but at the same time presenting their own challenges for how they're presented. A challenge I'm still wrestling with as I get deeper into exhibition planning right now. I hope you'll have a chance to see the exhibition and the solutions we come to if there is such thing. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. I've been so enriched and I'm excited to share my contribution. I'm Maddie Blomquist. I'm the Roy and Carol Christensen Curator of Religious Art at Brigham Young University, which is a museum in the Brigham Young University Museum of Art in Provo. And this is a position that has been held by two other people before me and is currently the only endowed position at our museum. So it's a very interesting job to hold. My presentation explores how stewardship of religious-related art and collections within academic museums can nurture both intellectual and spiritual engagement. It considers how curators and exhibition teams might balance theological sensitivity with scholarly rigor, and how museum practices such as exhibition design, object interpretation, and educational programming can open pathways for visitors to encounter art as both an aesthetic experience and a spiritual practice. I'll spend most of my time talking about an exhibition titled Earthbound and Heavenward, the Sacred Art of Discipleship, which features objects primarily from our permanent collection of Western Christian art. However, before I do that, I do want to give you a sense of who we are, what the museum has done in the past, and where we're headed. So, celebrating its 150th birthday this year, BYU is a private university established and sponsored by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. With around 33,000 plus students matriculating each year, it is one of the largest private universities in the United States and is fully accredited by the Northwest Association of Schools and Colleges. As a church-affiliated school, religious experience and spiritual life is essential to the university's mission as its academic standards and achievements. The phrase disciple scholar has been used by both university and church administrative leadership over the past several decades to categorize academic scholarship as a form of worship and higher education as a dimension of consecration. This commitment is also expressed in the university's motto, enter to learn, go forth to serve. For students and faculty, pursuing education is a part of preparing oneself to contribute positively to one's community and an integral part of faith and lived religious experience. And this is what the university strives for at its best. The museum was founded in 1993 to steward a growing university art collection and provide a dedicated space where aesthetic treasures could be preserved, restored, and displayed under conditions that invited contemplation. Currently, the MOA is housed within the College of Fine Arts and Communications, but works closely with art history and humanities faculty and students within the College of Humanities. It also strives to create opportunities for interdisciplinary connections and collaborations by engaging with departments across campus. We are sort of a mid-sized museum, so we have 102,000 square feet publicly available for viewing, a main level and a lower level, as well as extensive vault and fabrication spaces, 18,000 plus art objects in our collection, 10 exhibition galleries. We have about 20 full-time staff members, 3 of which are curators, 2 of American art, and then 1 of religious art, that's myself. We employ about 100 plus students at any given time across departments. We are the best visited museum in the state, if not the Intermountain West, with about 250,000 visitors per year and bouncing back since COVID. We give around 600 tours a year, both self-guided and docent-led, and we have staple programming events like our Art After Dark, which consistently sees between 2,000 and 4,000 people in attendance each evening we do that. Admission is free, and as is most of our programming, and we are open to the public. We mount between 7 and 10 exhibitions per year, and these include exhibitions featuring our permanent collection, in-house curated exhibitions, and traveling exhibitions. And so you can just kind of get a snapshot of what we've done the last couple years. But in the past, we've curated and hosted major shows of Norman Rockwell, Maynard Dixon, Carl Bloch. I've collaborated with contemporary artists like Patrick Dougherty and Nina Kachdorian, and also done what we can to fill gaps in our own collection by partnering with group exhibitions and facilitators to feature Islamic, Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, and indigenous aesthetic traditions in our space as well. Our two main collecting areas are American art, particularly art of the Western United States, and then religious art, which is currently mostly Western Christian art from 1500 to present, with some specific Latter-day Saint artist holdings. Both of these categories are imperfect and fraught in their own ways, but nevertheless describe previous emphases in the collection's history and what you might expect to see when you visit. In terms of sort of the American art highlights, and sometimes these collections for us as curators overlap, but we have staples like Sargent and Innes, which is wonderful. We have the largest collection of Maynard Dixon paintings in the world, and also a substantial amount of Dorothea Lange's work as well. But we are also actively trying to expand diversity and representation in our collection and have others such as Marie Watt, Henry Ossawa Tanner, Faith Ringgold, Benny Andrews, Jan Hayworth, Victoria Sambonaris, and Jenny Holzer. We also have one of Robert Indiana's love sculptures in our collection. And then for religious art, we have a lot of works on paper by Albrecht Dürer, Rembrandt van Rijn, but also a Rembrandt Head of Christ completed by the artist and those working in his studio, which is sort of a gem of our collection. And also a fair amount of 19th century and pre-Raphaelite works, including those by Herbert Gustav Schmalz, Ernst Zimmermann, William Dice, Marion Stokes, and then others, like I mentioned, that are important to our particular audience of early and contemporary Latter-day Saint artists emerging and established, like C.C.A. Christensen, Minerva Teicher, Arnold Freeberg, Trevor Southey, J. Kirk Richards, and Annie Poon. When people think of the MoA, they often think of the first two works, and now the third work. We have a Plexus installation by Gabriel Daw that was installed in 2014 and now acquired last year. Karl-Heinrich Bloch's Christ Healing the Sick at Bethesda, and then recently unveiled a historic gilded replica of the Berkeley Gates of Paradise, which we think will also be a benefit from years to come. So typically visitors who come are often members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and as a part of BYU and by extension the church brings certain expectations to the Museum of Art, one of which is a devotional expectation. In fact, when the museum was opened, a high-ranking church official came to consecrate the space with what is called a dedicatory prayer, and in this benediction he proclaimed, "May all that is exhibited here be uplifting in its nature and speak to the glory of thy creations." So we are a university museum, but we are also a church institution. My colleagues and I are dedicated to the preservation, care, and ethical contextualization of the art objects we steward in our collections and the exhibitions we bring to this audience, but we do so within a very particular type of framework that often requires a great deal of strategy to navigate successfully. In my position, I am tasked with being fluent in two different languages, one that is art historical, guided by the current scholarship and curatorial best practices, and one that leaves room for viewers to experience divine encounters through sacred art objects. For the past decade or so, we have had periodic reinstallations of both American and religious art collections that are often up longer term, anywhere between 3 to 5 years. So when I arrived in July 2024, my first major exhibition project was to curate the next iteration of religious art from the MoA's permanent collection. And there were several considerations for me as I embarked on this. One was this sesquicentennial celebrations. The exhibit would open during the university's 150th year, and I wanted to capitalize on the timing as well as strategically align with certain aspects of the university's mission, like the disciple scholar rhetoric, which accounts for the subtitle of this show. Due to the length of the exhibition, I wanted the topics to be rich and able to sustain different programming initiatives and repeat visits from visitors over multiple semesters and years. And then perhaps most importantly, I wanted our permanent collection to really sing. Because there are chronological, geographical, stylistic, and representational gaps in our collection, I opted for a thematic rather than an encyclopedic approach to leverage what we do have to support our visitor experience. There are also pedagogical benefits to this thematic approach as well that allowed for visitors to more easily follow the flow of the exhibition and create a compelling case for why the objects on view were chosen and even how they are in comparative dialogue with one another in the galleries. In terms of the number, there are 52 objects on view at any given time, ranging from paintings, sculptures, video work, photography, works on paper, ceramics, some other outliers including a pressed plant piece, and then a French Book of Hours. And the variety of media makes for a more dynamic visitor experience and helps people see things anew from object to object. I also wanted to place contemporary works next to historic ones to help close some of the gaps in our collection, but also to help viewers understand the way that contemporary artists are often in dialogue with artists of the past. Even though many visitors to the museum operate within their own specific religious context, the main title, Earthbound and Heavenward, was meant to convey universal themes where sacred art can evoke bigger ideas for viewers of various backgrounds. So this is just a sample of text from the intro panel. I'll just read that first, that kind of middle paragraph. Human experience is marked by both mortal realities and lofty aspirations. We are at once grounded by our embodied existence and uplifted by the possibility of godliness. Artists, especially those working within religious frameworks, have examined and collapsed the sacred distance between humanity and divinity through depictions of Christian deity, biblical prophets, everyday saints, and holy landscapes. So religion, in this case, is one way to address the discomforts of the human experience, and then within that, even more specifically, Christianity's sort of theological solution to traversing that sacred distance through Christ as a salvific figure. The galleries are divided into 5 sections. Of Heaven and Earth is sort of this first section that expands upon the introductory panel. Desire and Emulation is a second section on the left. You can kind of see how you would enter that space. And then it also kind of turns around into the third section, which is called and Consecrated, which extends into the hallway, to a fourth section titled Saints and Sinners, which kind of wraps around this little nook, and then off to kind of the other side. And then a final section, Pupils and Prophets. And this gallery does have 2 entrances, and so the Pupils and Prophets section could be also the first section, depending on how you enter the gallery, so we kind of had to think through that as well. Previous iterations of the religious exhibition took inspiration from high church aesthetics in their design. For this one, we went in the opposite direction and strove for something more domestic and earthy. So one thing I love that our designer did is the olive-toned color gets a shade progressively lighter in each room to kind of convey this feeling subtly of ascension that's so critical to the show. In our wall labels, there are also little symbols on each at the bottom of the circle within the square, which is sort of a nod towards that humanity, divinity, heaven and earth duality that we're exploring in the exhibition. And then we also had the text available in Spanish and English on the wall, which is not something we've always done, as well as large print labels to improve the accessibility of the exhibition and broaden our community impact, make sure this was a space of welcome. Perhaps the biggest shift that I wanted to help our audience make is to move away from a cultural approach where religious art objects have sometimes been appropriated in Latter-day Saint context to support certain theological frameworks. I did several things in my curatorial text, object selection, and our educational programming to invite visitors to learn more about other faith traditions and welcoming people into the space. So using the word believers frequently in labeled text to allow viewers to self-identify rather than assuming or coercing anyone into that they were kind of coming with the same frameworks that everyone else might have. And since much of the religious collection currently consists of Western Christian with some Judeo-Christian art as well, I wanted to represent a diversity of perspectives even within that, from theologians, writers, and religious leaders outside of the Latter-day Saint tradition to broaden the interpretive scope. So each panel includes quotes from individuals across Christian, and in this case, Abraham Heschel, a Jewish writer, kind of articulating some of the major themes in the exhibition. We also didn't want to make assumptions in the text about the artist's devotional lives if primary sources didn't substantiate that. So we tried to balance the way that biblical and apocryphal narratives, just like mythological ones, were often sources of inspiration for artists working during particular time periods and within certain movements. So we tried to balance the influence of popular subject matter on artists with the intent that they might have indeed had to facilitate a devotional experience of some kind. We also, for contemporary artists in the show, we interviewed all of them and made audio snippets available through a virtual gallery guide for visitors to access so that they could speak for themselves and share insights into their works directly. We also tried to set a tone of that sort of interfaith dialogue as well in some of the programming. So we invited a non-denominational choir to perform a setting of the Shaker hymn, Lay Me Low, for the VIP opening, which really set the tone for the exhibition. It's up through September 2028, so we just opened this last fall, and so far the reception has been largely positive, and we're fairly pleased with the results, but there's always more work to do. This was the first of many exhibitions that I will work on in my role, and even though I still want to kind of push some of these things further, I do feel like it accomplishes some important things. So in the future, I plan to continue to center interfaith dialogue, expand the category of religious art beyond Latter-day Saint and Christian art, while still stewarding important holdings in these areas in our collection, and collaborate in meaningful ways with both campus and local communities to meet the needs of our audiences. I'm, of course, learning a lot from you all as well, and interested in hearing your thoughts and learning more during the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, while we're getting the PowerPoint up, I'll just say I'm Sean Burris. I am the curator of Judaic art at the North Carolina Museum of Art, and I want to begin by saying thank you to Emily for the Herculean task of putting this together. Thank you to the Racklin Murphy for hosting us. Thank you also to the Lilly Endowment. Not only for today, but for the work they are doing, Jessica and her team are doing to sponsor conversations like this across the country, including at our museum, at the North Carolina Museum of Art. So I want to share with you today some work that we've been doing recently at the North Carolina Museum of Art around this question of what does it mean to host religion in a museum, and particularly in a state museum. The North Carolina Museum of Art is a state institution, which means I am a government employee, with all the joys that come with that. But before I share the more recent work, let me start with a couple of the foundations. I'm going to share with you what I consider kind of two of the foundations of the work that we are doing today. The first foundation is our collection of ceremonial Jewish art. We were the first gallery of the kind in the country of Jewish art in a global or fine art museum. It was founded in 1983, but its roots go back actually to 1975, an exhibition, which means we have been in this space of thinking about religion in the museum for over 50 years now. And that's the gallery that I inherited. It's a wonderful, wonderful, it's really a privilege to work with that gallery. And the gallery exists kind of in a bubble, not only in the country. There are a few other institutions that are doing this today, including the MFA Houston. It was really great to hear more about the work you're doing there. But also within the museum, it exists as a bubble. And that is because it is installed in a way entirely different from the rest of the museum. The objects are organized according to their ritual or ceremonial function. They are not organized according to anything remotely art historical in principle. So to give you just one example, I'm showing you here a case that is devoted to the holiday of Purim. For those of you not familiar with it, it follows the familiar template of Jewish holidays. They tried to kill us, we survived, let's eat. With the addition of kind of a Mardi Gras-like environment. But this case is not remotely art historical. It's part of the joy I have working with it, actually. It's not organized chronologically. We have a 17th century Dutch scroll inhabiting the case with a 20th century piece of op art. It's not geographically organized. Again, we have a Dutch piece, but we also have Turkish pieces, we have Galician pieces, and we have a piece of contemporary Israeli art. And it's not organized by medium. We have op art, printmaking, and silver filigree work inhabiting the same case. So it really is, like I like to call it, a Judaism 101, which is very distinct within the museum environment. And it also can be both a productive and a challenging stumbling block for visitors and for our docents alike. When docents come into this gallery, they're asked to really interrupt their art historical narrative and teach about religion instead. And that can be quite challenging, let me just say, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But along the way of 50 years of doing this, we've learned a few things too. And I'll pause here to frame this by saying that I have a beloved donor who actually the donor of one of the objects in the Purim case, who said to me one day in a loving but also very pointed way that you guys are murderers. You kill these objects when you put them in cases. And she's not wrong, right? I mean, I think that's something that we all feel when working with any historical or cultural object, but particularly with religious objects. When we entomb them in these glass cases, we are severing them from the rituals, their use in rituals that continually reinvests them with meaning. And so they become these static objects. Now, we have developed little ways of nodding towards that ritual use in the gallery. Subtle as, if you'll notice, the candle holders in our case devoted to the celebration of Shabbat all hold candles, and not only that, but the wicks on the candles have been lit to make them look like they were used. Our Torah cases, our tiques, from Baghdad and from China hold Torah scrolls that we actually acquired to put in them to make them look more like functioning ritual objects. And perhaps my favorite example is that our Torah ornaments are clothed with these beautiful mantles or robes that we rotate throughout the year seasonally in accordance with prevailing synagogue custom, where colors are associated with certain periods and holidays of the year. All of these are ways we are trying to, in little ways, we're trying to bring to life or bring the ritual lives of these objects. The other foundation that we have is our audience. Probably like Houston, North Carolina is a distinctly religious state. It is not a distinctly Jewish state, but it is very religious. And I'm using data here from the 2014 Pew survey, not the more recent 2023, because they shifted methodologies, and I'm still digesting that. But the 2014 data told us that North Carolina, 80% of North Carolinians identified with the faith tradition. And even more importantly to me was the active level of which North Carolinians engaged with religion. And 2/3 of North Carolinians prayed every single day. So I think of that as sort of a foundation, another foundation of the work we are doing today, this desire to reach our audiences on a level of their identities that as an institution outside of the Judaic Gallery we had not really done before. And that is their religious identities. Now, one of the things we did as part of our Lilly planning grant in 2024 and 2025 was undertake an evaluation of kind of the state of religion at the museum with visitor surveys, docents, and staff. And this reflected a sort of a shared knowledge, a shared understanding of the state identity and the importance of religion to that, and the gravity of religion as a subject. There were also many questions about the appropriateness of dealing with religion in a government institution, in a state institution. And these sort of two forces combined with sort of to create both a sense of respect, but also kind of a deep level of fear. And the survey encouraged us to take religion with quote unquote extreme caution. It also generated, though, this really beautiful statement of principles. This was kind of democratically authored in our survey or our evaluation process. And this is a statement of principles, almost a mission statement that my colleague Angel Gonzalez-Lopez and I, who worked on an installation called Devotion, Religion, and the Arts in the People's Collection, kind of carried with us as we were curating that exhibition, and I'll just read it for you briefly. It says, the NCMA approaches the topic of religion and spirituality with a commitment to globality, sensitivity, and inclusion. This approach reflects the museum's responsibility to present objects as part of a worldwide phenomenon that transcends geographic boundaries and cultural differences. The NCMA honors the significance of these objects as sacred to those who have used or continue to use these or similar items in their spiritual, religious, or cultural lives. And through thoughtful curation, the museum seeks to create exhibits that reflect diverse identities, beliefs, and cultural backgrounds of its visitors and their communities. Now, importantly, I didn't write this. This was something that we received as part of our evaluation. I don't think I could have done a better job writing, though, a set of principles to guide our work in curating the exhibit, devotion, religion, and the arts in the people's collection. And you'll see perhaps some of the resonance of those principles in how we went about doing this work. The first thing is that we took a sense of extreme caution in that work. Candidly, we were quite afraid of doing this and of offending people. That is where a lot of the fear comes from, is sort of understanding just how deeply people hold their religious beliefs and their spiritual identities, and a desire not to get it wrong and offend them. And so in order to sort of avoid the complicated, messy, abstract questions of belief, theology, cosmology, we leaned instead into our what we've been doing for years in the Judaic Gallery, and that is the question of ritual, and really began to think about the embodied experience of religion, the physical aspects of religious practice. That was sort of the driving force, also in a recognition of the fact that we all have bodies, and our experience of religion, it might vary greatly according to the beliefs that we hold with us as we engage in religious acts, but many religions use incense. Many religions use wine in their ceremonies. There's a level grounded in the body in which we can connect to other traditions that are not our own as we think about the practices, the physical practices that accompany religion. And so here you're just seeing two works and a view of the installation. I'll talk a little bit more about the workshop of Rubens piece on the right, so I'll hold it for a moment, but I do want to mention this wonderful piece by a Greensboro-based artist, Ibrahim Said, that references millennia of Egyptian religious tradition, from the temples at Karnak to Islamic filter neck jugs. That was a piece we acquired in the process of this exhibition that I was very, very proud of. And just a little bit more about the scope of our collections and the scope of the installation. So this installation is the first gallery that visitors encounter when they come into the museum. It's always been intended to give the first-time visitor a sense of what they'll encounter throughout the rest of their visit. And this is the first time we're framing that thematic gallery with the concept of religion. And we were able to, we sort of recognized along the way that, while we had been speaking explicitly about religious art in the Judaic Gallery for 50 years, there were religious objects across the collection. And so here you see a work by the Cuban, moving left to right, a work by the Cuban artist Jose Padilla, referencing the tradition of Saint Lazarus and its syncretic interpretations in Cuba, a work by the Kenyan artist Ensign Soy, and a Veracruz state standing warrior female deity from our Ancient Americas collection. We went about thinking about that question of religious practice and embodied experience or encounter of religion under two major themes. The first of this was engaging the body, thinking about the ways that ritual objects mediate the experience or the encounter of the body with the spiritual. So these are just some of the objects that we use to talk about that. You can see on the far right a Peruvian chimu loincloth, ceremonial loincloth, a Ethiopian cross, a mask from the Mende peoples that would have been worn in masquerade, a tefillin set by the contemporary artist Moshe Zabari, and a Shango dance wand from the Yoruba peoples from our collection. These were a couple of the objects that really crystallized that theme for me. On the left, you have a contemporary piece by the artist Michal Rovner, and on the right, a painting depicting Joan of Arc from the workshop of Peter Paul Rubens. Crucially, it also illustrated the gap in conversation that we'd been having in the museum for many, many years, because we'd never talked about the religious aspects of this piece. We'd always talked about the art historical aspects of this piece, originally identified as Rubens, later the workshop of Rubens, and possibly the least Rubenesque woman to ever exit Rubens' workshop. In the context of this installation, the first reason that I chose this work was largely curatorial. It's probably it's huge, it's life-size, and it is probably the most recognizable to our largely Christian audience image of sort of the bodily comportment of prayer in the Christian tradition. She's on her knees and her hands are in a prayerful gesture, and she is, her gaze and her entire comportment is directed to this ivory cross. It is doing the work of helping us envision what it means to engage the body in religious practice. Similarly, the piece by Michal Rovner does many things. It abstracts the concept of prayer to what on the first glance looks like an ancient stone with writing on it. And I think that's a reference to sort of the timelessness of prayer. When one comes up close, though, one encounters a moving image of a single person going through prayerful gestures, moving their body in bows and bends, prostrations that don't resolve into any one tradition. Part of what Michal Rovner always does in her art is to universalize and to put the viewer into a place of uncertainty of what they are looking at. They're not looking at a particular form or tradition of worship here. They're looking at the universal act of prayer as Michal Rovner conceptualizes it. And that's really very fitting for the exhibition. The other theme that we did really engage with was the awakening the senses, we called it. Here we have a few of the objects installed, a ballet gong striker, a censario from Mexico, a Mayan flute, and a Havdalah set also by the artist Moshe Zabari. We installed these together with a sound station. We toyed with the idea, by the way, of doing a smell station. We had actually done it before, but logistically it was a nightmare. We had to keep refreshing the perfumes, and it's quite complicated. So instead, we had audio recordings of how these objects and others in the exhibition sounded as they were used to help people sort of encounter and use the objects, to bring them to life, to be a little bit less murderers for a second. And all of this really, the idea of awakening the senses for me really came from this object, again, using what we'd been doing for years in the Judaic collection to drive what we are doing now throughout the museum, or trying to do throughout the museum, this Havdalah set. And the Havdalah, which is a ceremony in Judaism that concludes the observance of Shabbat every week, is an incredibly sensory-rich experience that plays on all of the senses, really. One uses spice to smell and to bring the sacred of Shabbat into the week, the sweet smell and the sweetness of Shabbat into the week. Drinks wine, lights a candle and sees the reflection of the candle in the flame in one's fingernails, extinguishes the candle and says beautiful prayers and hears those prayers. So it's meant to be this all-encompassing or sort of very experiential moment to mark the division of sacred and profane time. And that sort of all-in-one nature in this compendium that we had really was the genesis not only of that theme in the devotion installation, but it was also the genesis of the whole exhibition for me. And lastly, we wanted people to see themselves. In the exhibition, we recorded this wonderful, beautiful video of what does devotion mean to you? We asked our visitors on a single Saturday, and we actually installed that as the title wall of our exhibition. So at the back, you can see that the title wall is actually a video where you're invited to see yourself and then respond to that prompt yourself. And the screen populates with responses as they're aggregated about what does devotion mean to you. So with that, I didn't tell you about all the programmatic ways we're doing it, but I'm excited to get to the conversation.
Thank you very much. If we could have all of our panelists back up. Great. And we'll be taking any questions. Taylor?
Thank you, all three. Those are fascinating looks into the work that you're doing. I'll just ask a quick question from Maddie. I'm so curious about the curation of maybe more historic works and interspersed with contemporary works. How is that going? Like, what's... I find that fascinating, and I'd like to see more of it, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, I feel like that's one of my big cards I like to play in my curatorial sort of handbook. But the images I showed, I couldn't really dig into a lot, but one of those is that pressed plant piece that I was mentioning by a contemporary female artist named Elise Whaley. That's sort of architectural, but it's also a silhouette of a woman, sort of a portal piece, and her hands are kind of in this gesture of supplication and humility. And so we put it next to a work that had never been on view before, that was a sort of circle of Tiepolo of the Dormition, death of the Virgin, receiving her last rites, and she is doing that. It's also a really atypical visual of that historically, but having that Baroque piece give context for Elise's kind of gesture, how she's evoking that, was really powerful. And that whole wall is Marian imagery in that room, and thinking through in that section of heaven and earth, sort of the incarnation and Mary's role in Jesus's humanity. So that is doing a heavy lift, but I love doing that. I love seeing that. I'm seeing that happen more often. It does hide some of the gaps. Like I said, there's a strategy to doing it that way, but our audience also tends to be intimidated by abstraction or more conceptual art. And that's actually what I love doing the most is contemporary religious art. I'm fascinated by that intersection. So I do feel like it's kind of part of my mission to prepare visitors, and one of the ways I like doing that is giving them just an immediate example of this is where this is coming from. So it's going well, I think, and I'll continue to do it and hope to see it more in other galleries too. Yeah.
Thanks to all three of you and to everyone who's presented so far today. It's an astonishing set of intersections. And in the final paper, I was so interested in what you said about extreme caution, about risk and the intensity of language around murder, and it's there's a lot. And so I'm curious for those on your right and left, for the others who presented in this panel just now, what did you think about that idea of extreme caution in your totally different institutions with your very different audiences, impetus, ethos, but also with a great deal of commonality? What are the biggest risks?
I think when I presented the idea of doing the David Moss exhibition, some of the feedback within the museum was, it could be great for the Jewish community, but will everybody else really get it? And we really kind of decided it's meant for everybody. It can be educational, but you can access it on many levels. Even if you don't care about the content, you can just enjoy the design. But one of the other things that is another wrinkle is some people occasionally asking, could this have a political edge to it? Because of being an Israeli artist and thinking of the broader scale of things, and I've continued to kind of push back and insist that that shouldn't be an issue at all when we're just judging this artist by his work and wanting to present that.
I think for me, the risks that I perceive with sort of my training at Yale Divinity School and what I'm bringing to my role are different than maybe the risks that the audience might perceive. I think in my institution, I'm coming from the opposite direction in terms of secularity is the perceived risk or threat, as opposed to devotion, which it sounds like that might be sort of what it is on the other side of things. And so I'm concerned, like I mentioned, with sort of a history of appropriation and just overlaying Latter-day Saint views onto art objects where they do not exist. And so I'm taking great care to sort of train our audience to have a little bit more distance from that, because I know that they will bring that to the table to their interpretation. That's not my job to do. That will just happen organically. But trying to really cultivate a sense of holy envy, an appreciation of other traditions outside one's own, that can be experienced and entered because an art object is outside of someone's self. So I guess that's how I would respond to that.
And I might expand just for a minute and just be sure that I'm clear that the risk or the attitudes that I'm encountering are largely from a place of respect and love. I mean, the docents are afraid to talk with the gallery because they don't want to get it wrong and offend people, not because they're anti-Semitic. My donor, the anecdote about my donor, that's because she loves these objects and cherishes their history and its fullness, and she sees the ways in which we aren't able to. She's one of my best conversation partners, honestly. The other way I would expand is say that I carried, my own fear. I mean, I think it's a deeply ingrained Southern thing about you don't talk politics and religion at the dinner table, and that holds true when we go to museums and all. And I had a lot of anxieties in doing this work as I first began to approach it, all of which I've come to find out in this moment in time, at least, are pretty well unfounded. We have not had pushback from the gallery, which has been on view since last June. I don't think I mentioned that. So it's been up for a long time now. The feedback and the engagement has all been positive, overwhelmingly. And it seems really, and I don't have hard data to back this up, but that people are eager to see this work being done and eager to see themselves and encounter other traditions too. And my worst fears have not come true in any way, by any stretch of the imagination. It's been liberating.
Have you had any pushback from museum goers about displaying objects from different religions side by side, like the mosaic versus the melting pot approach to this dialogue?
I have not, because the museum has a long history of displaying works in the same building side by side, this sort of the global approach. I mean, it's inherent to, in many ways, to the encyclopedic museum, and all the more so today as we're trying to do sort of cross-gallery connections. Most institutions are doing that. So no, I think maybe people are expecting that. People understand the museum as a place to go and travel. Yeah.
Donato, we'll take Donato.
A question for the entire panel, but do you think there's some limits about the museum inputs or need to celebrate? Meaning, what I mean by that is so I'm trying to fully form the question right now. If I can make a comparison with cinema, George, sorry, just 1 second. Cinema really brings you to the entirety of the human experience. In some way, in museums, when I'm looking at these presentations, also the aspects that are problematic about the past, they need to be reconfigured so that we celebrate ourselves. Is there a limit inherent in museums that, for example, you don't find in cinema that really brings you in the totality of human experience?
So I knew immediately when you started that question where it was going, because it's one I ask myself all the time, because I curate a Judaic gallery inside of a global museum where the paradigm is celebratory. It's to celebrate the achievements and the heights of human culture, and it makes very little room for the traumas and of human experience and history, which are inherent to the Jewish story. Like the Purim holiday, they tried to kill us and we survived. One of the ways I think about that a lot is the Holocaust narratives of a lot of the objects in our collection that sort of go untold historically in the gallery. And I don't have an answer to this at all. I think it is definitely a limitation of the discipline that the prevailing framework that we both articulate, but also what people expect to encounter in a museum is celebratory. And that is not a full picture of human culture. And it is something that I'm actively wrestling with in how I present Jewish culture within the gallery. How do I present a fuller picture of the highs and lows of Jewish history and Jewish art?
And I think, for example, working with the Asian art, we're reinstalling our Southeast Asian gallery, and of course we have lots of, wonderful Buddhist sculptures from Cambodia, Thailand, but a lot of these are just, say, heads that obviously were taken from statues, but then they came to the museum a long time ago, and then you're doing active, research into provenance and possible repatriation, but then always kind of gauging when is the question of, the traditional museum presenting the object for aesthetic appreciation? When is this great example of, Mohan Devarvadi sculpture, shall we show it? Or it's an educational moment to talk about this particular story related to the Buddha's life. Or you also get into more that kind of museum context of this is how the object got here. We have questions, we're looking at the dealer this came from and kind of judging that. So it almost feels like if you can remain as nimble as possible so that you can always kind of keep rotating those stories around. And it made me wonder at BYU, do you have a permanent collection gallery, or does it change every couple of years that the permanent collection is represented differently?
Yeah, so it changes every 3 to 5 years. We're actually, so the one I showed is on our lower level, and the American art is on the main level, and we're considering when the timing shakes out, like kind of switching those. So yeah, it's a complete thematic rehang every time, which is a lot of work for us, but it's a long enough time that like universities classes can build it into their curriculum, and there are sort of the favorites that are always on display, but we don't have the holdings to be encyclopedic around it, which I think inherently just makes it very different than another institution like some of the ones that you're coming from. Yeah.
Okay, we are going to break for lunch now. I'm told we have a cart of boxed lunches to come in, but first please thank the panelists and a round of applause here.